Join me on page 212 in the reading textbook, Keira's Magical Moment. We're going to be looking at context clues. Context clues provide hints to help readers figure out the meaning of an unfamiliar word. Restatement is a kind of context clue that gives a definition of the unfamiliar word. Here's an example of restatement. Her great-grandmother left her village because of a famine, a time of extreme scarcity of food. And you see these restatements often in our social studies and science books where they will use a term and then they'll restate it in simpler terms if they've introduced an unfamiliar word. Here they've introduced the unfamiliar word famine, and then they use a comma and they restate that and say a famine is a time of extreme scarcity of food. Okay, let's start reading. Follow along. Keira's Magical Moment. As Keira climbed into bed, she thought about tomorrow's field trip. Her class was going to a presentation by a West African traditional storyteller. Keira was excited because she was of West African descent. Her great-grandmother had come to the United States from Senegal. Until now, Keira hadn't thought much about her roots. So she was of West African descent, meaning her family had descended or came from West Africa. And then she gives the example of her great-grandmother who came to the United States from Senegal, which is a West African country. When her alarm went off, Keira rummaged through her closet. She was looking for something that showed her West African roots. So we can use the context clues here to figure out what rummaged means. She was rummaging through her closet, so she was in her closet, and then she was looking for something that showed her West African roots. So rummaged means to look through something. Generally, you're looking through something thoroughly, like we mentioned when we went over the vocabulary earlier. She dug through every drawer, but she couldn't find anything that really stood out. Finally, she put on a white shirt and jeans. Despite her plain clothes, she hoped that her interest in her heritage would not go undetected. Okay, so undetected, she hoped that her interest in her heritage would not go undetected. So she had plain clothes on, so you wouldn't be able to tell that she was interested in her heritage just by looking at her, because she couldn't find that the clothing that she was looking for in her closet. So she hopes, even though she looks just like every other kid maybe, she's hoping that people will realize that she is actually very interested in what's going on. At the community center, Keira was lucky enough to get a front row seat. The first speaker talked about African writers and how they often use traditional stories with traditional characters, such as the tortoise and the spider. The speaker mentioned writers her mother and grandmother liked. Also, Tortoise was a favorite character in Keira's bedtime stories. Finally, the speaker mentioned Dudu Nadea Rose. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. He was Keira's favorite drummer. He was from Senegal. She began to realize just how much her West African heritage influenced her American life. So she starts hearing these different stories, and she realizes, hey, I've been hearing these stories my whole life, just as a kid growing up, and she didn't even realize necessarily that these were all from West African stories, or from the country of her family's descent. Okay, turning the page, 213. Finally, the griot, or storyteller, took the stage. He told a story that explained how the chameleon, a small lizard, here's a restatement, it uses the word chameleon, and then a comma, and then it restates what a chameleon is. A small lizard changed its colors. When he introduced the tricksters, spider and tortoise, then he introduced the tricksters, spider and tortoise. They were known to fake generosity while actually looking for a handout. Some of the stories made these characters seem pathetic, as they fought for every last scrap. However, they were simply naughty. They certainly did learn their lessons. Keira couldn't help her mind from ricocheting through all the different stories her mother had told. Her memory was bouncing around like a ball. So now we can see ricocheting here, a word maybe we haven't heard or seen before. And then it's comparing it to bouncing around like a ball, and that's what ricocheting means. It means it's bouncing off something. She knew about everything the griot said. After the presentation, the class talked to the griot. Keira told about how her great-grandmother had moved to the United States from Senegal. Her great-grandmother left her village because of a famine. Here's a restatement again. So we have famine, comma, a time of extreme scarcity of food. So famine means a time of extreme scarcity of food or very little food. She had explained to Keira's grandmother that the villagers spent days scrounging for food. So scrounging, again, they spent days looking for food or trying to find food. Her great-grandmother, pursuing a better life, came to the United States. Keira told the griot about the familiar bedtime stories. When Keira was finished, the griot pointed out that she had just taken on his job. She had described her family and the stories they told. Keira could hardly wait to tell her mother and grandmother the news. So she realizes by telling the story of her family and the stories they tell, that's exactly what a griot does. They tell the different stories of their culture or their heritage. All right. Thanks for reading, and I will see you on the next video.